There we go. All right. Jordan, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Jane, thank you so much for being here. Welcome. This has been a long time in coming.
Yes,
We're really
sure.
excited. I'm really excited for this conversation. Uh, yeah, there's much to talk about, and don't worry, we will have a little conversation. Well, first, we're going to talk about Carole King and the book. We will save a few minutes to talk about the course we're teaching that's starting in a week and a half
Mhm.
about the news, to make a little plug. But first, your book, which is up here behind me. There you go. If you haven't purchased it yet, from Yale Press, on Carole King, and she moved. She made the Earth move. We gave a little nod to in our opening song. So there you go.
Great.
So I always like to begin these conversations, Jane, by asking what led you to write this book, and just to invite you to tell us the story of how it came to be. And really, I mean, I know a bit about your relationship with the music of Carole King, and so how did it come to be?
Well, thank you, Josh. So I was a teenager, 1971, that summer. Tapestry had just come out, and it was really a book like, excuse me, an album like no other. The songs were amazing. It felt like she was speaking right to us. Um, Here I was, a striving Jewish girl from the Bronx. Here she was, an already accomplished Jewish girl from Brooklyn. We had the same curly hair. I thought she was just speaking to me and so many others like me. And it just, it's such a cliche to say it became the soundtrack of our lives, but it really did. There's this theory among people who study this that the music you listen to in your teen years and early adult years is really the music that stays with you the most. And that was certainly the case for me. So I've been a big fan, went to concerts, saw the play on Broadway, became familiar with many of her albums. The ones that immediately follow Tapestry are really terrific. And so then I was approached a few years ago by the Jewish Live series at Yale to propose the name of someone I would like to write about. And so I proposed her, and luckily they liked it.
Wow. I didn't realize that. They actually ask. They come to you first as a writer and
I, I,
say,
I
"Who would you
shouldn't,
like to write about?"
that's what happened to me.
Uh-huh.
I'm not sure it's the same for others.
Okay.
Um,
Got
I
it.
think I think for others they reach out and say, "Here, let's make this shidduch,
We want a
screenwriter
book
and
about
subject."
Ludwig Wittgenstein, which is also coming out from Yale. Anyway,
Yes, yeah. You would
that's
not
another
ask
talk.
me to write that book.
Yeah. Um, so there are a lot of, I mean, I loved reading the book. There are a lot of really fascinating, like little, I would say, biographical details, nuggets. And one of them that was really, I thought was clearly most significant to you was the summer community in Connecticut that Carol's father, who was a New York fireman, we learn, helped to found. And it was also one that you grew up attending. And in that chapter, one of the things you talked about is the tension around Jewish identity that was at the core of the community. I'm going to quote you here, a little passage. You said, the founders were all Jewish firemen and their families, yes, all old enough to be familiar with American anti-Semitism and its much deadlier counterpart in Europe. Yet, like the Brooklyn neighborhoods from which they hailed, these men and women wanted to create, in the words of American Jewish historian Jeffrey Gurak, a community of Jews, not a Jewish community,
Mhm.
one that was predominantly but not exclusively Jewish, that provided a secular safety valve from the city's tribulations without the restrictions and practices that characterized observant Judaism. So I'd love to invite you to talk about this a little more because I think it's really one of the through lines of this book and in King's music. And I think even maybe in the Yale Jewish Live series. um, so I'd like to ask you, say more about this distinction between a community of Jews versus a Jewish community. And you can also tell us a little bit about your relationship with that community in Connecticut also.
Sure. So maybe it's best to answer your question by telling a brief history of Lake Wabika. That's what it's called. And so Sid Klein, Carol's father, her birth name was Carol Joan Klein. Sid was a New York City firefighter. At that time, there were so many Jewish firefighters that they used to have their annual dinner dance in the Waldorf Astoria. So you can imagine it was a good job, if you don't have a lot of education and you're striving to make it into the middle class. Um, it's the end of the 1940s, very early 1950s. There's concern among the firefighters that their wives and children are going to be in the city. There's a polio during the summer, there's a polio epidemic. So they start looking for some land that they could buy for a bungalow colony for the summer. And I won't get into all the details of real estate, but they found this abandoned Boy Scout camp on the top of a mountain. And it was surrounding Lake Wabeeka. And so they purchased it and started this community. The streets, there were very few of them. They were just starting to become real roads. They were named for the children of the original group of firefighters. So really the first street that you encounter when you come up the mountain is Carole Street. No E at the end. She herself added that later on in high school. And it was pretty rustic those first couple of years. I mean, I interviewed her closest friend at the time, and she described having no running toilets, and
that qualifies as rustic.
Yeah. Apparently, her mother could not get her brain around using the woods as a bathroom. So once a day, they would drive down to the mountain to go to a gas station. Wow. Anyhow, so it was really interesting how this community evolved. Initially, it was literally just for Jewish firefighters, and then expanded some for Jewish, like, public servants. My aunt was a public school librarian, so that's kind of how they were able to first rent for a few years when I was young, and then buy a home that my uncle still has and visits. And yet there was always this tension there, as you noted. They felt very Jewish. Sid Klein used to teach the other teenagers Israeli dance. But at the same time, when it came to discussions about building a synagogue, oh my goodness, there was a huge fight about that. And for even after they built the synagogue, there was a family who lived right across the street who would blare loud music on Saturday mornings, like Dafka, like, we really don't want you there.
A Jewish family who was doing that. Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Now there's a nice Jewish family who doesn't do that there. And now the community is expanded, not so much geographically, but in terms of the kinds of people who are there. It's not only Jewish, it's become more of a year-round community, no longer bungalows. They have nice homes with heat and running toilets. And it's lovely. It just so happens that I have a lot of friends here in Manhattan who have homes there. But the summer of 71, my sister and I were staying up there for, I don't know, a month or so with our mother. My aunt and uncle had gone away. We were supposedly watching after my two younger cousins, but in fact, we were hanging around in the community center during the days. And this woman was directing the Lake Wabeeka kids in a play. And it was, I remember that first summer was West Side Story. And one day we're like hanging around there, and she has her two granddaughters there, and they were Louise and Sherry Goffin, Carole King's oldest children. Their father was Jerry Goffin. And they're talking, like one day they were talking about a new song that Uncle James had told them. So like we felt like we were rubbing up against, this kind of stardust. And we used to think, oh, is she going to come to Wabika that summer? And of course she didn't. I might note that Carole King's parents, Sid and Jeannie, married, divorced, married each other again, divorced again, and then married other people. But even when they were married to other people, and in Sid's case, um, absorbed the two children from his second marriage, they both still had homes in Lake Wabika,
Hmm.
which was kind of
Interesting.
awkward, I guess. But,
Yeah.
they felt this affinity to that community.
Hmm.
Uh, so that's, I guess, the reason that I really feel connected to this amazing artist.
What I want to for a second hover on the question of um, that when you said there's a big fight about building a synagogue or not,
Hmm.
right? And there's a part of me that listens to this and is like, you know, a group of Jews who are building this place out in the woods and creating a little civilization. It sounds like basically a parallel to like early Zionists, in their own way,
Yeah,
who
yeah,
also would have had a big fight about whether to build,
yeah,
a big
yeah,
Knesset, build a synagogue potentially.
yeah.
Um, and and ultimately they did build the synagogue, right?
Hmm.
But I wonder if you can say a little bit more about what do you think was what were the stakes of especially the people that didn't want to have the synagogue there.
Hmm.
What was driving them? Because I think that that's going to come up as we talk a little bit more about Carole King's music, maybe. But what do you think was driving that there?
Well, remember this is the early 1950s. Anti-Semitism really had spiked after World War II and now is coming down. These were people who were trying to assimilate, um, you know, striving children and grandchildren of immigrants. And I suspect that some of this was just, religion, especially Orthodox religion, was the old country.
Mm.
And they were in this newer country. And they were still going to eat Jewish deli. And, they were still even going to observe holidays in their own fashion, but they weren't necessarily religiously observant the way we think about it. Israel was not perceived to be a pillar of American Jewish life. It was too soon after the Holocaust to really start digesting that experience. Uh, you, you know, uh, you mentioned something that reminds me. In a way, they were like Chiluni in Israel.
Yeah.
Very Jewish, still going to go to mom's on Friday night dinner, um, but then the next day go to the beach.
Right.
And I think this is what they felt comfortable doing. Um, there was even Jewish life in that time was not very inclusive. Um, I was told that in the neighborhood in which Carole King grew up in Brooklyn, uh, the families mostly stayed as members of a synagogue until their youngest son was bar mitzvah. Uh, in her case, it's another part of her story, but her brother was not able to have a bar mitzvah. And so her family never joined a synagogue. And I suspect that was true for a lot of Jews at that time, and so I think
And
that,
and, and, and you wind up coming back to that later when you talk about her son's bar mitzvah
yes,
that she goes out of the way to make happen,
to-
right? Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Interesting.
So I think they were trying to figure out like this how to be Jewish in this new reality
Yeah.
in America. And and that reflects what you said before about what Jeff Gorick told me. Um, Jeff Gorick, who, by the way, is an amazing historian and also grew up at Lake Wabika. In fact, Jeffrey Street is named for him,
Huh.
I think. But there is this difference between a community of Jews and and Jewish community, just like there's a difference between an an entertainer who is Jew happens to be Jewish and a Jewish entertainer.
So,
And
so maybe actually, so maybe there I'll segue us into the next question because this really
sure.
is now I think because like let's talk about her music for a second.
Okay.
Right. I mean, so because that's kind of one of the questions here is she a Jewish entertainer? Is she a Jewish songwriter? Or is she a songwriter who's Jewish? Um, so I especially want to focus on "You've Got a Friend," which we will play on the outro. Stick around at the end if you like the intro. We saved her best song for last because she always does at her concerts. I'm told.
Mm,
Anyway, so "You've Got a Friend." So on page 173. I have it written down here on my screen. I'm not going to grab the book. But anyway, you quote gospel singer Mary Clayton as
mm,
saying that the whole album, Tapestry, she says, quote, was an anointed project. It
mhm,
had God all over it as far as I was concerned because I could feel it.
mhm,
I can feel that music and I can get a little tingle from the back of my neck and up my back. It had magic.
mm,
And then you quote King herself saying that you've got a friend quote, was as close to pure inspiration as I've ever experienced. The song
mm,
wrote itself. The song wrote itself. It was
mm,
written by something outside of myself through me.
mm,
King even agreed that the song came from beyond her. So, this is the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. You've done many book talks in many places, right? But here
mm.
we are at IJS.
Yeah.
And this is probably the most spiritual part of the book,
Mm.
as far as I'm concerned. So I want to talk about it. What do you think is going on here? This invitation to talk about Carole King's spirituality, but also then we can get into like
Mhm.
Jewishly what's happening, if there's something Jewish.
Well, I mean, she never talks about it in more than the terms of what you're saying. But if you think about how You've Got a Friend came about, there's this perception. I mean, there's um, a a narrative that says she was very close to James Taylor, remains really, really close with him. He just wrote Fire and Rain, a sort of sad song about losing a friend. And this is her
Hmm.
response to that. So I think part of it is on a very human relationship level that she is responding to a friend who's expressing pain. And it wouldn't surprise me if she said this just came through her, because even though they had just become friends, they really understood each other
Hmm.
musically. And I can imagine her feeling this in response to him. And I think that while she was not um, conventionally Jewish in any way, or terribly overtly spiritual, I do think that that belief that music has some kind of divine purpose or can be read in that way. I don't think it's just You've Got a Friend. I
Hmm.
mean, I people may not agree with me, but I think there's several of her songs that you could read as not just simply saying that they're love songs, but that they are speaking to the divine. I mean,
Where you lead, I will follow. I mean, that's a direct quote from the Book of Ruth.
that
Yeah.
was not on my list, but no, I think Natural Woman. I mean,
Um,
first of all, it was written for Aretha Franklin. That's a whole other story, how these two Jewish kids wrote this song for, this amazing gospel singer. But the chords have the what they call the church cadence, sounds like amen.
hmm.
Um, the the way it talks about someone, something speaking to you, helping you, making you feel, answering, you in in the depths of your soul. I don't know. I mean, everybody should like listen to that song again with this in mind, but I really think that there. I think it about a later song that wasn't on Tapestry called You Light Up My Life.
Mhm.
Again, you could read those lyrics and say, wait a minute, is this a song to a lover or this is a song to something else?
Or
So
maybe
clearly,
you're also illuminating, if you don't mind, if you're illuminating, what's the song? I mean, Jewishly, we literally have a song of songs, which is about exactly this. Like
yeah.
it blurs the line between the love between people and the love between people
Mhm.
and the divine, right? And so,
Yeah.
and yeah, I mean, there's a lot to that potentially. Yeah,
And the magic of these songs, their lasting value, is that you can read them in different ways.
yeah,
And it
yeah,
might strike you at one way at one time in your life, and then another way at another time.
yeah. Um, I want to actually ask you one more question about the music for a second. That uh, I didn't know. I was a music major in college, as you may know, and so I was not expecting, knowing you, to get as much music theory as I got in this book. You did a deep dive. You did a few
Yeah.
deep cuts on some of the like the Carole King chord. And can you just say a little bit about like that process of it sounded like you made reference to like taking some lessons and whatever, but yeah, just can you say anything about that?
Yeah, I think early on, Josh, I just felt like I needed to be able to explain her music from the inside out. Um, I do think this is not to make a broad criticism, but oftentimes, especially in daily journalism, not so much in books, and when we're writing about a popular musician, tend to focus on the lyrics.
Mm,
I mean, I may get people angry at me, but I don't really understand what's so special about Taylor Swift's music. I totally understand what's so special about her lyrics. So we tend to focus on that. Not that there isn't anything special about her music. I just haven't heard or seen people write about it in that way. But I wanted to do something different and original. I wanted to be able to explain what was special about her music, particularly because she didn't write the lyrics for many of her early great songs. We've just been talking about Will You Love Me Tomorrow, Natural Woman. Those lyrics were written by Jerry Goffin. So, so how do I do this? Well, if I wanted to write about an airline pilot, I'd probably want to figure out what it was like to fly an airplane so I could describe that. That will never happen because I'm terrified of doing that. But, I used to play the piano. My husband had gotten me this big, thick book of Carole King songs years ago, sat down at the piano, tried to play them, couldn't do it, and realized I wanted to find a piano teacher who would help an older student like myself just understand this a little bit more. I'm going to be honest because we're friends. I think there was some insecurity in me as well because I'm not a music critic. You know, I know how to write about American Jews, I know how to write about women. Music was not my language. The book contract was still approved. I mean, I didn't pretend to be somebody I wasn't, but I wanted to go deeper into that. And to me, that was one of the revelations in my research, which is discovering that while her songs are very melodic and peppy to the ear, when you try to start to play them in the way she intended, they're so much more complex than at least I realized, and I suspect a lot of other people realize too.
beautiful. Um, Okay. I want to invite you to. There's a quote, very powerful quote towards the end of the book on page 230, that Carole King. It came from. I think it was either during or it was about a concert at Pine Knob, which is
Hmm.
a performance venue outside Detroit, near where I grew up, Ann Arbor. Um, and I was really struck. It was a very powerful passage, and so I want to invite you if you got it there um, on page 230 to just read that for us. And just, I would love to, and this is you, you're reading Carole King now. Um, but then, maybe we can just spend a moment, think about what does that have to teach us about the spiritual journey?
Um, yeah, so part of this, I'm just trying to see how to set it up. Okay, yes. So her oldest daughter, Louise Goffin, who's a singer-songwriter herself and a wonderful musician and music journalist named Paul Zollo, for a while had a podcast, and uh, they got Carole King to be on it, and there's like 4 or 5 um, episodes of this podcast, and it's quite special because she rarely talks like this. So I am saying that because the setting I think is important. There
Hmm.
was certainly a degree of trust there. And I just stumbled upon this podcast in my research, and it was like a gold mine. So it's Pine Knob Outdoor Music in on her 1973 tour. Partway through the concert, the rain began and then turned into a downpour. Muddy Pond. She plays on under an awning. And she said the audience stayed with her. And now here's the quote. You know, they're sitting there and they're just in their ponchos and just getting drenched and they're there to hear the music. It makes me love them even more. And it makes them love me even more because they're making this sacrifice. So at the end of the show, I remember taking a bow and the response was so overpowering. And I felt my heart open up just a little bit and take it in. It was the most frightening thing I've ever felt. It was so powerful. I could almost feel the physical thing of doors closing to keep out that frightening feeling. It was too much love. It was just too much. It was unreal. I can't take this in because if I'm taking it in, it will destroy me. And I didn't know why, but I never allowed that to happen again.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, but, that line again, like we keep coming back, but that line about, that they loved me and I loved them and we were in this like, infinity loop. I mean, you
Yes.
could, she sounds at that moment to me, maybe just because we just had Yom Kippur and Sukkot. I mean, that sounds an awful lot like if God were talking about what happens in the Beit HaMikdash. Like they love me and I love them and it was beautiful. And then we had to close the doors because it was going to be overwhelming, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, y- yeah, I mean, there's something. I mean, this is I mean, I think it sounds like you didn't say this, but you hinted at it. I mean, she's not necessarily like she's not the Jewishly. Um, she's there's not a lot of texture there.
Mhm.
Spiritually, is profound, right? I
Mhm.
mean, I mean, what you just read is that is somebody who's been someplace. And
Mhm.
really has discovered something about self-awareness and
Mhm.
and yeah, like knows herself, which is
Yeah.
really incredible.
And she was very young then. She was 21 years old um, when this was all happening. And I think she ended up coming back and back to this, not in those words at all. I've never seen her express it like that. In her own memoir, she didn't. But I think that this is part of what made her so fearful about fame, so anguished about it, so worried about it. Um, and yet you could also say that, she disappeared to Idaho for, a couple of decades, lived off the grid, wanted really nothing to do with East Coast or West Coast, except when she would emerge every now and then. And maybe that was also a deep spiritual um, behavior as well, saying, I need to go someplace else for what nurtures me, for what I can handle. I don't know. I mean, she is a really complicated woman,
Yeah.
which is, what attracts you as a writer, because it's interesting that way.
There's a question that came in here that I want to share that from David, who says that Carole King wrote a memoir in 2013, and he asks, "Where does your book go that hers doesn't?"
Good question. Um, So first of all, memoirs are indispensable when you're doing the kind of research that I was doing, but you have to remember that they're imperfect documents. I mean, someone who is writing his or her own life, especially if you're a celebrity, well-known politician, whatever, there's lots of things that aren't said, or there's things that are said that others have interpreted or recounted in different ways. We just spoke about Lake Wabika. This must have had dominated part of her life. Her father organized this whole community. She went up there in the summers. Her cousins lived next door to her. The whole thing, she doesn't mention it in her memoir at all. At
Right.
all. She credits her father at the very end with doing this. I in one interview with when she got the Kennedy Center Awards, I saw that she mentioned it just in this offhanded way to explain why she was attracted to go to Idaho and be in the wilderness. So I'm just bringing that up to say that there, big parts of one's life that you might not want to mention. You might want to point to other things. Um, she declined my many, many requests for an interview. So you quoting from her memoir was indispensable to me. It was really important for me to have her voice. So in that way, her memoir was great, and it was very courageous in many ways. But it is an imperfect recounting of her life until then. And I think that I add a real lot to it. I hope I do.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Wonderful. Uh, I want to give us a few minutes to talk about the news, if we want to just shift gears for a second.
Sure.
Um, you and I, um, you and I have been talking about this for a long time,
Yep.
and for years, and finally making it happen now. Um, uh, uh, maybe the question would be like, how do you feel about engaging with the news these days, Jane? As a journalist and as a citizen and as a Jew,
Yeah.
and as a New Yorker, I'll add right now because like
Oh, yeah.
boy did
Pretty
it heat
tough.
up this week. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. So to everyone out there, I mean, Josh and I have been talking about this for years and years, trying to figure out some way to find the right platform and the right opportunity to really look at, first of all, this feeling that you have of just wanting to avoid the news, which we all have, journalists included, and then, okay, we know we don't want to do that because we're citizens and we feel like we should be well informed, and we're talking about the news in a broad across many platforms. So we feel like we should be informed, and yet we're not, and then we feel guilty about it. So what are the healthy responses to this? And we're really trying to, in a sense, argue and then show that Jewish spiritual practices and traditions can really address this in multiple ways. And so that's what our course is going to be about. Um, I, I can't speak for you. I am so looking forward to this, not only to get to teach with you, but also because I'm feeling this. Like I need this. Because I keep on thinking like maybe it'll get a little better, and there's moments when you feel like it does, and then yeah, I'm in New York. This last 2 days have been really painful to be a Jew,
Mm,
really.
yeah.
And uh, you know, what what happens on the outside of our world isn't anywhere near as terrible as what we do to each other.
Mm.
Uh, and so, yeah, I really hope that you, as many people as can, join in this conversation because we're also going to learn from you, and and we we want to be able to sort of show to the world that there's real value in these spiritual practices to deal with this very real issue.
Yeah. Yeah, and Jane has introduced the language of news avoidance syndrome
Yeah.
into my lexicon, and so it's actually it's a real thing.
It is.
So somebody a couple of questions that came in about this. Number one is, will it be lecture or there will be discussion, there will be breakout groups, it'll be probably more participant, there'll be a little bit of like frontal, but it'll be a lot of interactive. And somebody also asked, what happened the last 2 days in New York? There's just been a lot of, there've been a number of rabbis and now rabbinic petitions circulating on various sides of the mayoral race, and just the Jewish community. There's been a lot of heat. If you Google New York mayor's race and Jewish community, you'll probably find
Yeah.
some stuff. So that's the answer to that question. But wonderful. So Jane, just to wrap up on Carole King, I guess to come back to the question, how would you answer the question? Is she a Jewish songwriter or a songwriter who's Jewish?
I not to dodge here, but in a way, it's both. I mean, we just spoke about some of the songs that have a spiritual component to it, either in the way they were written, or at least the way one can hear them. She was insistent that her son, she has 4 children, and the youngest was her only son, and she insisted that he have a bar mitzvah. I tracked down the rabbi who officiated. I tracked down the bar mitzvah tutor. The way the bar mitzvah tutor tells it, it's possible the son was not totally into this bar mitzvah study, but did it anyhow. It was very meaningful to them. Apparently, they had like some sort of reception in her, must have been a rented home in Malibu, I think, somewhere in California near there. And the family gathered. By then, she had long divorced her second husband, Charlie Larkey, father of Levi. But he was there and other people were there. Apparently, she played You've Got a Friend on the piano. Everybody cried. So clearly, this was important to her. That same rabbi, Rabbi Levy, officiated at her mother's funeral. So I think the way I see it is that there are times of where she relies on Jewish ritual to sort of undergird her life at these moments, the life cycle moments, if you will. At the same time, this is a woman who released an album called A Christmas Carol, Carole.
Yeah, but all the Christmas carols were written by Jews. Let's be
It's
honest.
true. That is true. I talk about that in the book, actually. I was surprised at how many, I knew about Irving Berlin and White Christmas, but there's a whole lot others. But yeah, so, there is one track on this album that features Carole King singing with her oldest daughter, Louise Goffin, who's a singer herself, beautiful voice, and apparently one of Louise's children. And they're singing this kind of Sephardi tune to the prayer to lighting the candles for Hanukkah. So it's this nod. It's kind of like when I was in the choir in my public high school and we sang all these Christmas songs, and then there would always be one random, usually terrible Hanukkah song that they would throw in just to, I don't know, make us feel better. So it's like a mixture. It's like that to me. I look at that album and I think, oh yeah, she's part of American culture, right? I mean, we all do Christmas, whether we believe it in it as a religious holiday or not. I mean, we don't all, but the presumption is that despite what some politicians say, there definitely is no war on Christmas here. And she clearly wanted to align herself with that, and yet also has all these other Jewish aspects of her life. Um, and you know, you can even see this dynamic in a personal way. I mean, here's somebody who was born Klein and changed her name to King.
Hmm.
Um, was she escaping, anti-Semitism, trying to pretend she wasn't who she was? I don't know. She kind of looked Jewish, and she didn't try to change that. Maybe it was just better to have that kind of stage name. I don't know. There is this interview that she did with Henry Louis Gates's Roots show,
Hmm.
and she says at the end of it, even though she changed her name through four marriages, that she was going to go back to Klein. I mean, not as as her public name, but in terms of at least, I don't know whether she, changed it on her voter registration card, but she was going back to it at least as a nod to her ancestors and to her beginnings. So I don't know, I think there's a lot in there in which she's weaving in and out of Jewish belief and tradition, but I do think one thing is constant, which is she had a great respect for her parents and grandparents and great grandparents and what they tried to do by coming into this country. And that's not only a Jewish attribute, but I think it's an important one.
Yeah. Um, well, thank you for writing this book and
You're welcome.
for illuminating, Carole King's music, which is a wonderful part of many of our lives. I want to invite everybody to stick around because we will play "You've Got a Friend" on the way out. But first, I'm going to bring Jordan back to close us out, and we hope to see you at the class that that Jane and I will be teaching starts November 3rd. Thanks so much.
Thank you.